It's the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. For the next part of the program, we had planned to bring you a conversation on the strike among service workers at Illinois State University. But then, overnight, ISU announced they had reached a tentative agreement with AFSCME Local 1110, subject to approval of the membership. Part of the agreement is that both sides agreed not to talk about what's in it until that vote happens. So for now, that is that. Instead, we're going to talk about a number of legal cases involving Illinois and Illinoisans with my friend Hannah Meisel, who covers mainly legal affairs for Capital News Illinois. We taped this conversation earlier this morning. Hannah, thanks for stepping up last minute.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, so the Trump administration wants data on Illinois voters. What is going on there?
Yeah, this is a search that's kind of a year in the making. The Department of Justice has requested this information from many states, but Illinois, like a lot of other states, definitely democratically run states, have refused to give the Department of Justice the full unredacted voter roll information. And in response to that refusal, the DOJ in December sued the state of Illinois, along with some of those other states. And in documents filed recently in that case, it was basically kind of suggested that what the DOJ had asked for, to make sure that states were following federal law, in terms of preserving, their voter rolls and maintaining them, was basically a pretext. Let me read for you from my colleague Peter Hancock's story that was published yesterday. A second document filed last week in the Illinois case, an email from the acting chief of the Civil Rights Division, etc. I believe our reply should always be, we will use the data in a manner consistent with the federal law and say nothing more. None of the federal laws require the DOJ to give the states information about what we're going to do with the data. No judge will have authority to limit us beyond a promise of federal law compliance. So this is a really interesting case. I also want to note that in a couple of jurisdictions, federal judges have thrown out cases from, the similar cases filed by the DOJ requiring this information. And no federal judge yet has, come out on the side of the DOJ. But it's interesting and revealing what the DOJ wants to do with this information, which is basically, as those who oppose the effort say, to basically purge voter rolls in ways that are, kind of taking a bulldozer where maybe a scalpel should actually be involved.
I think it's worth remembering the context as well that President Trump has said, Republicans should take over the elections,
Yeah.
federal Republicans. So clearly this seems to be part of a bigger strategy that they're employing that also includes redistricting in a lot of states. We're seeing rushing in, especially after the Supreme Court's voting rights decision a week ago or so. All right, well, that's something that's going to continue. We can continue to watch. You mentioned that no state has yet approved, or no judge has yet approved this request of information from states. Do you have a sense of what happens next here? What is the next phase of this case?
Yeah, I think that we're gonna see a lot more, motions before this case ultimately gets to any sort of decision-making phase. But, in those motions, we could see even more documents come out. These documents that were filed were actually obtained through Freedom of Information request. And so we don't know what else might come out. And it's also interesting to note that some of the folks behind it were former DOJ attorneys who want to, I guess, basically expose what they believe is happening at their former agency.
All right. Well, that is one way that the federal government is attempting to, take it to the people of Illinois through the law and the courts. Another one is through an investigation into Illinois schools regarding teaching on gender. You covered this story recently. What is that all about?
Right. The Department of Justice has basically opened investigations into dozens of school districts across the country, this calendar year, and then also last year. But this goes back to one of President Trump's first actions back in office when he was, sworn back in for a second term last year. In early February 2025, he signed an executive order about keeping men out of girls' sports. This, of course, is a controversy that's been, swirling in the last several years. Extremely, extremely, extremely rare, but it's definitely gotten the hackles up of, parental rights groups and even, just normal parents who otherwise might not have been very politically involved or politically inclined. It's one of those things that really, I think, does break through, especially if you have school-age children participating in sports. But under the auspices of this executive order, the DOJ and the Federal Department of Education, even though it's been somewhat dismantled also, to the extent that it's still alive, the two of these agencies have partnered up. They have created a special investigations unit, and they have been doling out, notices of investigations to many school districts. And so last week, the DOJ said it is investigating 35 Illinois school districts plus Chicago's largest charter school network, the Noble Schools, for quote unquote, teaching gender ideology and, making sure that these districts have an opt-out process if they are teaching this quote unquote gender ideology. And then also, investigating whether they are allowing biological males, trans girls to participate in girls' sports, and also, what their single-sex bathroom and locker room policies are. And the districts are kind of spread all over Illinois. It's really interesting. I created an interactive map so readers could see just how kind of random it seems the spread is. It really doesn't involve a lot of the big suburban school districts that have actually been in the headlines in recent, in the last decade or so, involving these issues. A lot of them are actually quite small rural school districts. Like I mentioned, also the Chicago's largest charter school network. And, they're just all over the state. Also, Bloomington School District, one of the largest, of course, school districts in the whole state of Illinois. One superintendent did have a theory that these might be consistent with schools that have applied and gotten DOJ grants that have to do with school safety. And maybe that's what flagged these districts. But for now, it's kind of an unanswered question why these particular districts have been flagged. And we don't really know yet what the investigation might entail. Like I said, the DOJ has done similar, opened similar investigations, and in a handful, at least according to their press releases, they have, closed the investigation and found, quote unquote, violations of federal law. But the DOJ did not return any requests for comment, and it's just a very kind of opaque process, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I was curious when this came out. Lick Creek Community Consolidated School District
Mhm.
16, which is P through 8. I mean, I would be surprised if they're, put genderqueer on the curriculum or something like that there. So it is sort of an open question, like you said, exactly what the, alleged violations in each district are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's again very opaque. I think the districts themselves really have no idea why they've been I guess targeted in this way. And The state did back in 2019, Governor Pritzker, while he was still a new governor, did sign a bill that, not unlike many similar pieces of legislation in the last decade or so that say, hey, Illinois history curriculum should include a little unit on, say, Asian American uh, contributors to state and national history, Black historical figures, Hispanic historical figures. There was a bill back in 2019 that he signed into law that would include, LGBT historical figures. It's really unclear how much that has impacted any particular curriculum. But again, that was a statewide bill, and Illinois has something like 800 public school districts, and these 35 plus the big charter school network. It just very random again.
Fascinating. All right, well, let me remind listeners this is the 21st show. We're speaking with Hannah Meisel, who is a reporter specializing in legal affairs coverage primarily for Capital News Illinois, the statewide news service based out of the state capital in Springfield, although Hannah is based in the Chicago area. A little more than 5 minutes left in our time together. Let's talk about some of the immigration enforcement. There has been, this was obviously a big story last fall. By the way, congratulations to our friends at the Chicago Tribune who just won a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of Operation Midway Blitz. But the legal fallout of that case is still going on. So talk about the Broadview Six. Let's start there.
Right. So this is one of the kind of enduring cases. Our colleagues at the Chicago Sun-Times have done a great job tracking all of the civil cases that have, don't have to do with actual, people's actual immigration status. And of those, few dozen cases, the vast majority have, either been dismissed or somehow else resolved. Only recently have there been a couple of guilty pleas. So the feds have really not been having a great batting average in the cases that came out of those couple of months during Operation Midway Blitz, when protests were very intense. But these so-called Broadview Six, I'll remind listeners, were six individuals who were protesting at the ICE facility in suburban Broadview in late September, just a few weeks into this mass deportation campaign. They were indicted in mid-October, made public, I think, on Halloween. And the feds happened to charge these six people, including then congressional candidate Kat Abou-Gazela, and five others who were, politically involved, some candidates, some local officials in the Chicago area. And, they were charged with an overall conspiracy charge, which is pretty rare for protests, but according to sources I've talked to, kind of an increasing tactic, which has been really interesting to watch, and also charged with misdemeanors that they had assaulted an officer, which doesn't actually require touching, because they were blocking a vehicle from entering the ICE facility that had driven through the crowd of protesters. Last week, very suddenly, we have what's supposed to be a trial coming up at the end of May for the remaining four defendants. The feds said, hey, we are dropping the big conspiracy charge, which was kind of a win for these four, because they've said all along that the conspiracy charge was, extrajudicial basically, and completely out of line. But it also then would block them from seeking the grand jury transcripts that ultimately got them indicted. And I think we'll see that fight is going to be ongoing, because they want to know what happened in that grand jury room. The three times that the grand jury was called to meet about these possible charges that ultimately resulted in the indictment. Because that's an opaque process that they want to, really understand what the DOJ is saying to get these charges filed.
Well, maybe just time for one more story here, which is related to immigration enforcement and Midway Blitz, and that is this demand for a special prosecutor. There's a court hearing that's going to be coming up soon. Who's asking for that?
Yes, so this group, this is an ongoing thing for months now. After Operation Midway Blitz wound down, um, there's been calls for, uh, obviously, if the feds are not going to investigate their own federal immigration agents for possible abuses that were committed during Operation Midway Blitz, that state and local authorities, particularly the Cook County State's Attorney, should at least investigate and file charges. Now, the Cook County State's Attorney, Eileen O'Neill Burke, has said for months now that her office is not equipped, is not legally able to, do this for a number of reasons. First, the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, says that, basically federal agents are not really under her purview as a local prosecutor, and also that she would need local law enforcement to forward her, kind of chart an investigation in progress for her to assist and then ultimately file charges. But a growing number of local elected officials and advocates want her to file charges, just as in Minneapolis, the Hennepin County State's Attorney has been doing. After, of course, the murder of Alex Preddy and Renee Good in January, resulting from their own protests.
Yeah.
And so, finally, we're going to see next Monday a local Cook County judge rule on whether or not a special prosecutor can and should be appointed. It's going to be really interesting to see what the rationale may be and if this actually happens.
Hannah Meisel with Capital News Illinois. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to continue the 21st show after a short break. Stay with us.